Hi, and welcome to the somatic experience of birth, disruption, loss of control, and postpartum integration. My name is Bobbi Barber. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, a board certified behavior analyst, and I have certifications for perinatal mental health and trauma. I specialize at the intersection of behavior analysis, somatic processing, sensory integration, and the emotional arcs of caregiving and attachment across the lifespan. Through my practice, Mindful Counseling FL, I support individuals and families navigating perinatal transitions, trauma, grief, and the emotional complex experiences. The following is intended for education and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical attention. This is also not meant or designed to be used as a diagnosis or in substitution of medical or therapy advice. I'm so honored to be speaking with you today. So, if you're an expecting parent, a new parent, or even a seasoned one, I truly believe that your experience is individual and unique. So today I want to talk to you about birth from a slightly different perspective because we often speak about it medically, like what interventions took place, were there any complications, or whether or not everything went well. Sometimes we also talk about birth as an emotional experience. Was it traumatic or was it empowering? But in light of that, it can be both of those things, but it's also something else. It's a profound somatic experience, one that involves intense sensations and a disruption to the body's rhythm. And even in moments, there is a shift away from a sense of control. And as we go through this, I'm speaking through the lens of these four things that one, not every birth has to be traumatic to leave an imprint. And that is more than a medical event, and it is more than just an emotional experience, and that everyone has an outcome that is specific to them, and each of those events have relevance. And this matters because not all women have a voice or an opportunity to talk about birth experiences outside of the realm of it being traumatic. There can be some lingering discomfort, shame, detachment, or even dysregulation. And their symptoms or talking about it can be often dismissed and overlooked. And I felt like this too with my firstborn. I went into labor 3 weeks early. I had no plan, no advocate. I didn't know I should or could have advocated for myself. My doctor didn't show up. I was given Pitocin without consultation. I had numerous people touching me without consent. They were telling me what to do, how I was going to do it. And I wasn't informed. I wasn't collaborated. Nobody asked me my wants or my wishes. I was just checking the box and moving along. Now, my birth wasn't what they would consider traumatic, and everything turned out just fine, but I was still left with the sense of like, what just happened? And I found out along the way that I'm not alone in that. And so here we are having these intense moments, and we may not be fully present, or we're in extreme pain, the overwhelm of fear. Our emotions can take over, and we may not always remember the experience or the moment, but the body does. And so, regardless of whether or not your birth was planned, supported, or medically uncomplicated, the process is an intense sensory input with physiological disruption and a rapid transfer of control. These shifts can leave a lingering feeling of disconnect, overwhelm, shame, or integrating the experience, even when there is no trauma identified. So throughout this process, we're going to go over 4 topics as smoothly and as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We're going to talk about sensory disruption of the somatic, which is the body, the loss of control and dynamics that contribute to that. We'll discuss a little bit of the postpartum somatic residue and integration frameworks to help bring it all together. So first, let's start with the body, the senses, and the response of those things in a labor and delivery setting. So birth is intense. This disruption happens. There's a loss of control that amplifies the disruption, and the body holds on to that even afterwards. So we want to learn how to integrate it to help us settle. What is there to disrupt? right? So to understand why birth can leave an imprint, first we want to understand how the body is experiencing it. The term somatic means soma, or the body. The body, soma, is a sensory laden system that is constantly receiving sensory input, information, interpreting of that information, and then determining how they're going to act upon it. So there's this subconscious and unconscious process that's continually ongoing. And there's also intensity shifts, changes in hormones, and then in the background, our nervous system activates, as well as continually taking in the information about the environment. There are 8 sensory systems that are continuously looking for this information for our bodies. We have an internal and an external collection. So the ones that you're probably most familiar with are the 5, which is our visual sensory system for sight, auditory sensory system for hearing, the tactile sensory system is touch, the olfactory sensory systems collect information on smell, the gustatory is our sense of taste. We also have 3 other sensory systems. That's the vestibular, the proprioceptive, and the interoception. Our vestibular systems are the inner ear. This is responsible for our balance and our spatial coordination. We also have a proprioceptive sensory system. And this is a hidden awareness about that gives us information about our body position, movement, and force in space without using our vision. This is the regulation of motor control, our posture, and our coordination. And then finally, we have an interoception sensory system. And this is the internal state that our body has, right? It's sending information to our brain about hunger, thirst, our heart rate, any senses or changes in internal pain, and temperature. The goal of that system is to maintain a homeostasis and emotional regulation. Now, during pregnancy, sensory input is altered, right? So if all of that is taking place in the background without our awareness in the state of pregnancy while you're growing a baby or multiples, you have heightened senses of smell, taste, touch. There's also changes in vision, balance, coordination, and your weight. There's alterations in that body awareness, right? With shifting pelvises, your muscular system is changing, your cardiovascular system is changing, your endocrine system, your digestive system, right? So there's these internal states that are taking place too. We have different cues for hunger, body temperature, and even urination. So eventually, your pregnancy is going to come to an end. And at the end is the beginning of labor and delivery, right? So all birth is a change in status. And that change in body state is a disruptive series of events. And as delivery approaches, the body's sensory input is also adjusting, like we talked about with the 8 sensory systems. And it's going to begin reporting back to your nervous system. Braxton Hicks contractions. You might have cervical changes, pelvic adjustments, and not to underestimate the powerful changes in your hormones. So these sensory fluctuations are information. And so the body doesn't evaluate birth the way that the medical community does. And it's going to respond to this intensity and disruption differently. And even when the body is in a safe place, you will still have stress responses taking place. And then in the background, we have this amazing thing called our nervous system. And this is the body's command center. It's the communication of the body to the brain and the brain to the body. And it's made up of your brain, your spinal cord, and your nerves. These 3 things that are taking place all the time are collecting, especially that sensory input. And so it's going to be, as the body is changing and moving forward and adjusting to pregnancy and then labor and delivery, all that information is going to be taken in. And in the background, your nervous system is operating on one of 2 ways. It's operating like a gas and a brake system. That's just the most simplest way to put it. And there's more to it, but for simplicity's sake and just for the this presentation, we're going to talk about it as having one or two responses to all the information that's taking place. And that is a gas, which means go. That is your sympathetic response of maybe fight or flight. And then on the opposite side of that is the parasympathetic response, which tells your body to put on the brakes. We can rest, we can digest, we can regulate. And so your body's sensory systems and labor is going to have you in this state of either activation or regulation. Okay? And so this nervous system of yours, which is so amazing, is going to change and adjust in the stages of early labor, active labor, and then even in recovery. Active labor is closely related to the gas. This is the let's go state. And it's not just influenced by the natural rhythm of the body preparing itself. It's also taking in everything that's happening around you. And in active labor, though, there's a high probability that someone or more than one person or team is going to help you out or intervene. So labor and delivery rarely happens in a vacuum. And this is where interventions, interruptions, and disruptions start to come in. You may be at a hospital, you could be at your home, you could be in a birthing facility, you might even be on routes to your birthing location, or you might even be in public, or some other environmental changes are going to be taking place during labor. As delivery approaches, things are going to change, sometimes quickly, suddenly, or even abruptly. And this leads to an elevated stress situation. There are some common interventions that do alter the somatic or the body experience. Things like cervical checks, Pitocin, an epidural, induced labor, movement restrictions, C-sections, push coaching, IVs, oxygen, catheters, and fetal monitoring. And none of these are inherently negative, but each changes the body rhythm. And any introducing of an interruption means that the body is going to record and track them in time. Medical care is important and does save lives, but every intervention also changes the sensory and the nervous system environment of birth. And there are some effects. So some of those ways could be your physiological and the psychological effects of the interruption. When your body expected birth to be one way and maybe it was experienced another. So there are physiological impacts of interventions, and the body and the brain are continually absorbing all of this information. All of these bits of information are filtered for understanding, meaning, and relevance, and go through the neurological process to generate an appropriate response. However, this system of organizing information can become stuck, overwhelmed, underwhelmed, halted, or interrupted. So what happens next? Well, we can have the psychological impact of those interventions and disruptions, even if they're medically necessary. Sometimes in some places, there's a shift from you to the provider or your providers. There's this pressure and protocol-driven decision-making, which can affect your mind, your brain, and the experience. And some people and some women have reported that you're losing the sense of my body knows what it's doing, and it does become they're telling me what to do. There is a post-delivery stress response or somatic distress as a result of these birth disruptions. Here is an article. There are more research out there, but research is increasingly describing birth as more than just a medical event or an emotional event, but starting to recognize that it's neurological, psychological, and even social. And so there are some researchers out there. I found this one. If you're interested, it is a really great integrative model of a maternal experience and the hormones that take place during childbirth. But when the plan doesn't go as planned, or when you didn't have your wishes or wants respected, or even if you weren't even prepared in the best of circumstances, there can still remain a sense that something happened to you, or that you are completely unable to grasp your birth experience. And here we are at loss of control. And if this was your experience, I am very deeply sorry, because there's a shift that happens in agency, right? Where your internal knowing of what to do has been bypassed by external direction. The sense of being in charge of yourself or the moment was removed, and it was managed for you. So when agency disappears, the nervous system does what it is always designed to do, which is under stress, I'm trying to protect you. And this may look like my body is doing this, but they are doing this for me. This is happening to me. This is being taken away from me. And this can happen in subtle ways. This is only a brief list of some examples of what can take place in the birth setting. And even when they're medically appropriate and required, nobody's doing anything wrong. It's the shift. Some examples of loss of control could be being talked over, rapid decision making, compliance under pressure of you or your partner or your birthing team, language that overrides your intuition. This is medical terminology. Being physically positioned or moved without information or consent. There's also being instructed on how to breathe and when to push. Being told that something is urgent, or even if you are in a hospital under the best of circumstances, sometimes when shift changes happen or your medical team changes, that starts to feel like a disruption as well. And I want to take a note that, not all doctors, nurses, staff, policies, protocols, facilities, and hospitals are abrupt and cold. I'm not saying that. Some are very kind, considerate, and helpful. But I'm making the point that even under the best of situations, there is a dynamic that changes and shifts that we aren't always prepped or prepared for. These systemic dynamics that affect our body's experience are the power struggles in a medical setting. There is a compliance culture when it comes to being in medical. Yes, this is not to undermine medical authority or professional input when it does come to cases, but for the person who's going through it, there is a tendency or an opportunity to fawn in that compliance because we have limited communication opportunities. This is talking about non-emergency situations. There's rushed explanations. Sometimes we aren't given the opportunity to walk through something. Then there could be this fear of being judged, dismissed, or being labeled as non-compliant. And we don't want to be in a medical situation where we are being mistreated or being devalued. At the loss of control, when our agency or our ability to decide what is happening for us, there could be some somatic stress. And potential stresses that happen can leave us with a panic, an overwhelm, a loss of breath, an awareness. Sounds become distorted or too intense. Dissociation during birth is common, and it has a protective factor from our nervous system, but can leave us with fragmented memories. Later, you can say, well, I wasn't fully there. I don't remember what happened. Everything took place so fast. This is not a weakness. This was about your body protecting itself. There is a more discussion about the stresses and even postpartum stresses that happen. The Journal of Reproductive and Infant Psychology has a study talking about the consequences of birth, talking about broadening the diagnostic criteria for the possibility of PTSD as a consequence of childbirth. So in the aftermath of birth, when that's all said and done, the mom is moved to recovery and she's in that state, right? This baseline is usually approached as purely physical for medical reasons, right? We're checking that there's no excessive bleeding. Everything is starting to heal. There's no fever. What could be left over? Well, there could be some unresolved stress, that loss of agency or an unfinished birth experience. So here we are at the somatic residue. So when interventions are a part of your birth story, what is the outcome? If the birth is not integrated, residue can remain. So the soma memory, this means that the body remembers things automatically, unconsciously, past our minds, right? And because the mind is not the only storage facility that we have. Many parents report that nothing traumatic happened, but something still feels off. Something's still sticking around. This could be irritability, sensory sensitivities, flash sensations, having this detachment or out of body experience when trying to remember. So most postpartum struggles can begin here when we said it wasn't traumatic, right? So what's wrong? Your body may remember it differently than your mind did. There is this leftover response, right? And your nervous system can remain in a state of dysregulation. Dysregulation could show up as having a difficult time bonding with your baby, maybe feeling shame that you don't feel connected, feeling touched out, overstimulated, overwhelmed by not only the needs of a baby or a newborn, but the sensory needs of that child as well. And this is where integration happens. So what if we didn't wait for something to be traumatic to realize that was impactful? What if we started to normalize this disruption as an event or experience in itself that can be helped? So the goal here would be to integrate, and it's not to relabel the birth as either traumatic or not traumatic, but integration means to bring separate things whole together. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about how to fully realize the birth story and the birth experience to make it your own, to gather the pieces of what was taken, adjusted, and shifted, and then bring them back to a place where we hold them so it's complete and finished. So the question becomes, how do we do this? How do we integrate this? Well, we can do this with somatic ways, and that means bringing the body back to a place of gathering. This can be done through 5 suggested ways: sensation tracking, breath recalibration, mapping the control shifts, and a gentle narrative reconstruction, and then a co-regulation repair. I do have resources for these because it would take too much time to go through all 5 of them in detail. They are available for download and you can have them for free. And then also there's the sense of restoring agency. And this is the mind part, right? We want to bring the mind and the body together in one collective way. So we are not going to relive the birth though mentally, right? We're just organizing and helping the nervous system recognize that that event is over, to complete what feels or felt unfinished. And this can be accomplished with birth story integrations, mapping where control was lost. There are some techniques for reauthoring. And then we want to do a partner collaborative reflection, and as well as creating a postpartum ritual of closure. Like I said, I have all of those available to you to go through at your pace and to adjust as you need. But moving forward, we want to acknowledge that there is a somatic experience of birth so we can create a deeper space for postpartum healing, because it's not just something that happened to your body. It's something that your body remembers. So let's avoid that. It doesn't have to be traumatic or not traumatic to have felt it. It's embodied, it happened. And we want to honor our parents' narratives without reframing them for them. So some takeaways. Disruption in the birthing process is inherent. Control and loss of agency leaves an imprint. We can heal it through with integration practices. And for my clinicians, just some points that we can talk with our clients and our friends and anybody about exploring the sensory memory, identifying points where control was lost, normalizing the protective response that you may have had or that somebody you know may have gone through, paced with a narrative reconstruction, and then reinforcing the currency of agency. If you would like the gentle companion guide to continue this reflection, I created a Reclaiming Your Birth Story and Birth Integration toolkit. It includes all the somatic practices and birth story prompting. You can scan the QR code on the screen and it will be sent directly to you, or you can go to mindfulcounselingfl.com/giveaways, and there are additional resources too. As always, if you want to connect with me, my name is Bobbi Barber and I am with Mindful Counseling FL. Here is my contact information. And I just want to say thank you so much for your attention. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have a great day. Thanks.